My name is Helen Smith, and I'm 68 years old. 3 days before New Year's Eve, I handed my daughter the keys to financial freedom. What she handed me back was a betrayal so deep it still takes my breath away. But let me tell you something about underestimating a woman who spent 40 years building her daughter's dreams. We don't just crumble when you push us down. We rise, and when we do, we take everything we built with us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I thought I was giving my daughter the best gift imaginable that December morning. 22 years of mortgage payments, finally complete. The beach house in Myrtle Beach that had been our family sanctuary, our weekend retreat, our slice of paradise, paid off in full. Not a dime left owed. I signed the final payment with hands that trembled not from age, but from pure joy. After my husband Robert passed 5 years ago, keeping up with 2 mortgages had nearly broken me, but I did it. I sacrificed. I scrimped. I worked overtime at the hospital where I'd been a nurse for 3 decades. Also, my daughter Jessica could inherit something beautiful, something valuable, something that would give her the security I never had growing up. The beach house wasn't just property to me, it was where Jessica took her first steps on the wooden deck, overlooking the Atlantic. It was where she learned to ride her bike on the quiet street, lined with palmetto trees. It was where she brought her college friends for spring break, where she got engaged to Marcus on the very same deck where she'd taken those first wobbly steps 24 years earlier. Every plank of wood, every grain of sand in the yard, every sunset viewed from that wraparound porch, held memories that money couldn't buy. When Robert died, I could have sold it. The financial advisors told me to sell it. My sister Margaret begged me to sell it. The monthly payments were eating through my savings faster than I could replenish them, even with the overtime shifts that left my feet aching and my back screaming. But every time I thought about letting it go, I'd remember Jessica's face when she was 7, building sandcastles in the front yard, or at 16, reading books on the porch swing, while the ocean breeze played with her hair. I couldn't take that away from her future children. I couldn't break the chain of memories that tied our family to that special place. So I worked. God, how I worked. Double shifts became triple shifts. I took on private duty cases on my days off. I canceled my cable, switched to the cheapest phone plan, bought generic everything at the grocery store. I drove my old Honda until the transmission finally gave out, then bought another used Honda with 150,000 miles on it. I stopped getting my hair done professionally and learned to cut it myself in the bathroom mirror. I gave up my gym membership and started walking the neighborhood for exercise. Every penny I could scrape together went toward those mortgage payments. The house in Charleston where I lived became secondary. It was smaller, older, nothing special. But the beach house, that was the crown jewel. That was Jessica's inheritance. Her future, her security. I'd lie awake at night sometimes, calculating and recalculating the numbers, figuring out how to make it work for just 1 more month, 1 more year. The stress gave me migraines that would last for days, but I pushed through because I had a goal that was bigger than my own comfort. Jessica knew I was struggling. She'd see me counting bills at the kitchen table, notice when I'd decline invitations to dinner because I couldn't afford to split the check. Observe how I'd grown quiet when conversations turned to vacations or shopping. But she never asked if I needed help. She never offered to contribute to the beach house expenses, even though she and Marcus used it nearly every weekend. She never suggested we sit down and talk about the financial strain it was putting on me. Instead, she'd send me pictures from the beach house, her and Marcus grilling on the deck, her friends lounging by the pool I'd had installed 3 years ago with money from my retirement fund, her posting Instagram stories from our family getaway, while I was working night shifts to pay for the privilege of her enjoying it. Don't get me wrong. I loved seeing her happy. I loved knowing she was making memories in the place that meant so much to our family. But sometimes, late at night when I was calculating whether I could afford both groceries and the electric bill, I wondered if she understood the cost of her happiness. Marcus was a different story altogether. He came from money, old Charleston money, the kind that builds generational wealth and expects others to maintain the same standards. He loved that beach house, maybe even more than Jessica did. He'd talk about the renovations they'd make once it was theirs, how they'd expand the deck, upgrade the kitchen, maybe add a second story. He spoke about it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to choose between buying groceries and making a mortgage payment. He assumed ownership without having earned it, dreamed of improvements without contributing to the foundation. I tried to like Marcus. I really did. He made Jessica happy, and that was supposed to be enough for me. But there was something about the way he looked at the beach house, the way he'd walk through it like he was already measuring for furniture, that rubbed me wrong. He'd comment on things that needed fixing, suggest upgrades that would cost thousands, talk about their future plans for the place without ever acknowledging that I was still the one paying for it to exist at all. The final mortgage payment was due December 20. I'd been planning for this moment for months, setting aside every extra dollar, even selling some of my jewelry to make sure I had enough to pay it off completely. The morning I wrote that check, my hands were shaking. Not from fear but from relief so profound it felt like a physical relief. 22 years of monthly payments, $37,000 in total, finally complete. I owned that house free and clear. I decided to surprise Jessica with the news. She and Marcus were staying at the beach house for a long weekend, and I drove down on Saturday morning with a bottle of champagne and a folder full of documents. The deed, the satisfaction of mortgage, the title insurance policy, all with her name already added, as co-owner. I'd done the paperwork weeks earlier, so excited to give her this gift that I could barely contain myself. When I pulled into the driveway, I could hear laughter and music coming from the backyard. Jessica had invited friends over, a spontaneous pool party that stretched across the deck and into the yard. I recognized some of the faces from her wedding 2 years ago, others from various social media posts. They were all young, successful, carefree in the way that only comes from having financial security. You didn't have to build yourself. I walked around to the back gate, carrying my folder and champagne like precious cargo. Jessica was floating in the pool on an inflatable swan, wearing designer sunglasses, and a bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Marcus was manning the grill, wearing swim trunks and a button-down shirt left open, looking every inch the successful investment banker he was. "Mom," Jessica called out when she saw me, paddling the swan toward the pool edge. "What are you doing here? I thought you were working this weekend." "I was, but I got someone to cover my shift," I said, holding up the folder. "I have something special to show you." She climbed out of the pool, grabbing a towel from one of the lounge chairs. Her friends continued their conversations, but I could feel their attention shifting toward us. Marcus looked up from the grill, his expression unreadable. "What's all this?" Jessica asked, noticing the champagne and documents. I couldn't keep the smile off my face. "The house is paid off, sweetheart. Completely paid off, and I've already added your name to the deed. It's yours now, officially." The silence that followed wasn't the joyful surprise I'd expected. Jessica stared at the folder like it contained something dangerous. Marcus set down his grilling tongs and walked over, his face serious. "Mom, that's really generous," Jessica said slowly, "but you should have talked to us first before putting my name on anything." The champagne suddenly felt heavy in my hands. "I thought you'd be happy. You love this place." "I do love it. But ownership comes with responsibilities, property taxes, insurance, maintenance cost. Marcus and I are trying to buy our own place in Charleston. We can't take on additional financial obligations right now." I felt like I'd been slapped, but I've paid everything off. There's no mortgage. The only costs are the annual taxes and insurance, maybe $3,000 a year total. Marcus stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Smith? We appreciate the gesture, but Jessica's right. We need to be strategic about our financial commitments. We're looking at houses in the $800,000 range, and the banks are very particular about debt-to-income ratios. Having another property on Jessica's credit could affect our loan approval." "But this isn't debt," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's an asset. It's worth at least $450,000, an asset that comes with ongoing costs and responsibilities, Marcus replied. Look, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Why don't you keep it for now? Enjoy it yourself. You've earned it after all those years of payments. Jessica nodded enthusiastically. Yes, Mom, you should keep it. Think of it as your reward for all that hard work. I stood there, folder in hand, surrounded by my daughter's friends, who were now openly listening to our conversation. The champagne felt ridiculous, celebratory gesture for a celebration that wasn't happening. I'd expected tears of joy, hugs, maybe even a thank you for the decades of sacrifice that had made this moment possible. Instead, I was being lectured about financial responsibility by two people who'd never had to choose between paying a mortgage and buying groceries. You don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been working myself to death to pay this off for you. I've been living on nothing, working extra shifts, giving up everything, so you could have this place. Jessica's expression softened, but only slightly. Mom, I never asked you to do that. You made that choice on your own. The words hit me like a physical blow. Never asked me to do that. As if 24 years of her enjoying the beach house, posting pictures from it, bringing friends to it, getting engaged on its deck, somehow happened in a vacuum where my sacrifice was invisible. Right, I said, closing the folder. My choice. I turned to leave, but Marcus called after me. Mrs. Smith, please don't take this the wrong way. We're grateful for everything you've done, but we have to make smart financial decisions for our future. I didn't turn around. I walked back to my car, put the folder on the passenger seat next to the unopened champagne, and drove home in a silence that felt like drowning. That night, I sat in my living room with the deed in my lap. My name was on it, alone. I'd removed Jessica's name from the paperwork that afternoon. A simple phone call to the attorney who'd handled the transfer. The beach house was mine, fully and completely mine, but the victory felt hollow. I thought about all the weekends I'd worked instead of going to the beach myself, all the times I'd driven down just to check on the property after storms, to make sure the landscaping was maintained, to handle repairs and maintenance. I'd treated it like a trust fund for Jessica, a legacy I was protecting and nurturing for her eventual ownership. But she saw it as a burden, an inconvenience, that might interfere with her other financial goals. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy. I went to work, came home, watched television, went to bed. Jessica texted me twice, casual messages about random things. No mention of our conversation at the beach house. It was as if the moment had never happened, as if my offer to give her a $500,000 property was just another forgotten interaction. On Christmas Eve, Jessica called to confirm our dinner plans. She and Marcus were hosting at their apartment in Charleston, a trendy downtown loft with exposed brick and industrial fixtures. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, had even bought a new dress for the occasion. Just to give you a heads up, Jessica said, Marcus's parents are coming, and a few of our friends. It's going to be a bigger group than usual. That sounds lovely, I said, though something in her tone made me nervous. And Mom, about New Year's, we're planning something special at the beach house, a big party, maybe 30 or 40 people. We've been planning it for months. My stomach dropped. You're having a party at the beach house? Well, yeah, it's such a perfect spot for entertaining, and we've already sent out invitations. But here's the thing, it's going to be a younger crowd. You know, Marcus's colleagues, some of my friends from college. The vibe we're going for is pretty specific. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it would be better if you didn't come. I know that sounds harsh, but you'd probably be bored anyway. It's going to be loud music, dancing, probably go pretty late. Not really your scene. The silence stretched between us. She was disinviting me from a party at a house I owned, a house I'd sacrificed everything to keep in the family. Jessica, I said carefully, it's my house. I know, Mom. But come on, you'd be the only person there over 40, it would be awkward for everyone including you. Plus, Some of Marcus's friends can get pretty rowdy when they drink. You wouldn't enjoy yourself. But I wasn't invited to enjoy myself, I said, my voice getting stronger. I was being disinvited from my own property. Don't be dramatic. You can use the house anytime you want, just not New Year's Eve. We've already put deposits down on catering, hired a DJ, ordered specialty cocktails. This is important to us, more important than respecting the person who owns the house. Jessica sighed, the sound loaded with frustration. Mom, you're being unreasonable. It's one night. We're not asking you to give up the house forever, just to let us have one special evening, without worrying about whether the music is too loud or the conversation is too adult. Too adult for the adult who pays for the house to exist. You know what I mean. Look, I have to go. Marcus is picking up the catering deposit, and I need to finalize the music playlist. We'll talk more at Christmas dinner, okay? She hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the wall, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger, though anger was certainly part of it. It was clarity, cold, sharp clarity about who my daughter had become, and how she saw me. I was the maintenance crew for her lifestyle, the behind-the-scenes financier, who kept her dreams operational, while staying invisible during the actual enjoyment. I was useful for paying mortgages and handling repairs, but inconvenient for social gatherings and celebrations. Christmas dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd expected. Marcus's parents, Richard and Catherine, were polite, but distant, the kind of people who measured others by their net worth and found me lacking. They talked about their recent trip to Europe, their new boat, their plans to buy a vacation home in Kiowa Island. When the conversation turned to real estate, Marcus mentioned that Jessica had access to a beach house in Myrtle Beach, carefully avoiding any mention of who owned it or how it had been acquired. I watched Jessica throughout the evening, looking for some sign of the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who used to build sand castles and collect seashells, but that person seemed to have been replaced by someone who laughed at her father-in-law's stories about underpaying contractors and nodded along when her mother-in-law complained about how hard it was to find good help these days. When it came time to leave, Jessica walked me to my car. Thanks for coming, Mom. I know these family gatherings can be a lot. They're your family too, I said. I know, but Marcus's parents can be intense. They mean well, but they have strong opinions about everything, including me. Jessica looked away. They just think you work too hard. They don't understand why you're still nursing at your age, when you could be enjoying retirement. Because I spent my retirement money on a beach house for my daughter who doesn't want me there on New Year's Eve. Mom, please, can we not do this again? It's Christmas. I got in my car without saying goodbye. As I drove home, I thought about Richard and Catherine, how they talked about their properties and investments, like chess pieces in a game I didn't understand, but I was learning to understand it. I was learning that property was power, and power was something you used or lost. The next few days were quiet. I worked my regular shifts, came home to an empty house, tried to process the changes in my relationship with Jessica. The beach house sat empty, waiting for the New Year's Eve party that would happen without me. I thought about driving down there, asserting my ownership, reminding Jessica that it was my name on the deed, but I knew that would only escalate things, and I wasn't ready for that level of confrontation. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching property law, tenant rights, foreclosure procedure. I pulled out the folder with all the beach house documents, the ones Jessica had rejected, and I studied them with the attention I'd once reserved for medical charts. The house was mine, completely legally, undeniably mine. Jessica had no claim to it, no legal right to use it, no protection from my decisions about its future. She was, legally speaking, a guest in my home, a guest who could be asked to leave. The idea started small, just a whisper of possibility in the back of my mind. But as I read through the documents, as I remembered the casual dismissal in her voice when she'd disinvited me, the whisper grew louder. I owned a $450,000 house that I couldn't afford to maintain on my retirement income. Jessica wanted to use it without contributing to its upkeep, or acknowledging my ownership. She saw me as an embarrassment, someone to be managed and excluded from the life I'd made possible. What if I stopped making it possible?
The thought was frightening and exhilarating at the same time. For decades, I'd defined myself by what I could give Jessica, how I could support her dreams and ambitions. But what if I defined myself by what I needed, what I wanted, what I deserved? I spent New Year's Eve alone, watching the celebrations on television while my daughter and her friends partied in my house. I saw the social media posts, the pictures of champagne and dancing and midnight kisses on the deck where Jessica had learned to walk. She looked radiant, surrounded by people who would never know the cost of their celebration. At midnight, when the confetti fell and the crowds cheered, I made a resolution. I was done being invisible. I was done being useful but unwelcome. I was done sacrificing my present for someone else's future, when that someone didn't even acknowledge the sacrifice. I was 68 years old, and I'd spent enough years putting Jessica's needs before my own. It was time to put Helen Smith first for once. And Helen Smith owned a beach house that was about to become very expensive for ungrateful daughters to enjoy. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney, not the one who'd handled the mortgage payoff, but someone new, someone who specialized in property disputes and foreclosure proceedings. I had questions about my options, about the legal ways to protect my interests and reclaim control of my investment. The attorney's name was Patricia Williams, and she had the kind of sharp confidence that comes from decades of helping people fight for what's rightfully theirs. Her office was downtown Charleston, in a building that had been converted from an old bank, and her legal library was filled with cases about property rights and family disputes. "Mrs. Smith," she said after I'd explained my situation, "you have complete legal control over that property. Your daughter has no claim to it whatsoever. If you want to sell it, rent it, or simply prevent her from using it, you have every right to do so." "But she's my daughter," I said, as if that explained everything. "Yes, and you're her mother, but that doesn't give her the right to treat your property as her own personal playground while excluding you from it. You've been more than generous, too generous, if you ask me." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me with intelligent eyes. "What do you want to happen here? Do you want to have a conversation with your daughter about boundaries and respect? Do you want to establish a formal rental agreement, or do you want to reclaim your property entirely?" I thought about Jessica's voice on the phone, the casual dismissal, the assumption that I would simply accept being excluded from a house I own.
I thought about Marcus's lecture on financial responsibility, delivered while he stood in a backyard I'd paid for. "I want to protect my investment," I said finally. "I want to make sure that if someone is going to benefit from my decades of sacrifice, it's going to be me." Patricia smiled, the expression of a woman who'd heard this story before and knew how it should end. "Then let's talk about your options." The week after New Year's felt different, like I was seeing my life through new glasses. Everything looked sharper, clearer, but also more stark. I went through my usual routines at the hospital, checking on patients, administering medications, charting vital signs, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about Patricia Williams and the folder of legal documents she'd given me to review. Jessica texted me sporadically throughout that first week of January, casual messages about random things. A picture of her lunch, a complaint about traffic, a funny video she thought I'd enjoy. Not once did she mention the New Year's Eve party or thank me for letting them use the beach house. It was as if the conversation about my exclusion had never happened, as if my feelings about being disinvited from my own property were simply irrelevant. On Thursday, she called while I was having dinner, a simple meal of soup and crackers that I'd been eating while reviewing property law websites on my laptop. "Hey Mom, what are you up to?" she asked, her voice bright and cheerful. "Just having dinner and reading," I said, closing the laptop. "Reading anything good? Please tell me it's not another one of those depressing true crime books." "Legal documents, actually." There was a pause. "Legal documents? Is everything okay? Are you having problems with your insurance or something?" I almost laughed. Of course she'd assume any legal issues I might have would be about insurance or medical bills, the kinds of problems she associated with people my age. It wouldn't occur to her that I might be researching property rights or exploring my options as a homeowner. "No, just some paperwork related to the beach house," I said carefully. "Oh, good," Speaking of which, we left the house really clean after the party. Marcus made sure everyone picked up after themselves, and we had a cleaning service come in the next day. You should check it out sometime. It looks great. The casual way she mentioned the cleaning service, as if spending money on my property was some kind of favor, made my jaw clench. A cleaning service? Yeah, Marcus insisted. He said it was the responsible thing to do since we'd had so many people over. It only cost like $200, which is nothing compared to what we saved by having the party there instead of renting a venue. $200. They'd spent $200 of their money to clean a house worth $450,000 that I owned outright, and Jessica was presenting it like some grand gesture of responsibility. Meanwhile, they'd saved thousands by using my property instead of paying for their own venue. That was thoughtful, I managed to say. Marcus is really good about stuff like that. He has such high standards for everything. Oh, and I meant to ask you, would it be okay if we used the house for Valentine's Day weekend? Marcus wants to surprise me with a romantic getaway, and the beach house would be perfect. We'd keep it small, just the two of us. I stared at my bowl of soup, watching the steam rise from the surface. They wanted to use my house for their romantic getaway. The house they'd told me I couldn't visit on New Year's Eve because I'd ruin the vibe. Let me think about it, I said. Think about it. Mom, it's just one weekend. We're not asking to move in permanently. I know, sweetheart. I just need to check my calendar and see what I have planned. Jessica laughed, not unkindly, but with the kind of indulgence you'd show a child who was being silly. What could you possibly have planned for Valentine's Day weekend? You don't even have a boyfriend. The comment hit like a slap. Not because it was untrue, but because of how easily she dismissed the possibility that I might have plans, might have friends, might have a life beyond waiting to be useful to her. You're right, I said quietly. I don't have a boyfriend. I'll get back to you about Valentine's Day. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking around at the small space I'd called home for 15 years. It was a modest house, nothing fancy, with dated appliances and carpet that needed replacing. I'd never bothered to update it because every spare dollar had gone toward the beach house. This place was just where I slept between shifts, where I paid bills and worried about money. The beach house was supposed to be where I built memories, where I connected with Jessica, where I enjoyed the fruits of my labor, but I'd never really enjoyed it. Had I? I was always there to work, to maintain, to prepare for Jessica's visit. I'd never just lounged by the pool or read a book on the deck. I'd never invited friends over or hosted my own parties. I'd treated it like a museum I was maintaining for someone else's eventual enjoyment. The next morning, I called in sick again and drove down to Myrtle Beach. I told myself I was just checking on the property, making sure everything was secure after the party, but really I wanted to see it through my own eyes, not as Jessica's mother or the invisible caretaker, but as Helen Smith, the sole owner of a valuable piece of real estate. The drive took about 2 hours, and I spent most of it thinking about the conversation with Patricia Williams. She'd explained my options with the kind of clinical precision I appreciated from my medical background. I could establish a formal rental agreement with Jessica, charging fair market value for her use of the property. I could limit her access to specific dates and times. I could require advance notice for any gatherings, or I could simply revoke her access entirely. The property is yours, Patricia had said. You have no legal obligation to share it with anyone, including your daughter. Family relationships don't supersede property rights. When I pulled into the driveway of the beach house, my breath caught in my throat. It really was beautiful. The white siding gleamed in the January sunshine, and the wraparound porch invited you to sit and watch the world go by. The palm trees I'd had planted 5 years ago had grown tall and graceful, swaying gently in the ocean breeze. The circular driveway was perfectly maintained, the lawn emerald green even in winter. I sat in my car for a moment, just looking at it. This was mine. I'd earned every square foot of it with overtime shifts and sacrifice. I'd chosen this paint color, selected those fixtures, approved that landscaping. Jessica might have memories here, but I had ownership. I used my key to let myself in, something that felt strange even though it was my house. The interior was immaculate, just as Jessica had promised. The cleaning service had done excellent work, but as I walked through the rooms, I noticed things that hadn't been there before. A bottle of expensive wine in the kitchen that someone had forgotten to take home, a designer throw pillow on the couch that didn't match my decor, a framed photo of Jessica and Marcus on the mantelpiece that I'd never seen before. Small things, but they added up to something that felt like possession, like Jessica and Marcus were slowly making the space theirs, one forgotten item at a time. I walked out to the deck where Jessica had gotten engaged, where she'd learned to walk, where I'd stood countless times worrying about mortgage payments while she played in the backyard. From here you could see the ocean in the distance, a slice of blue between the houses across the street. The pool sparkled in the afternoon sun, and I could imagine how it must have looked on New Year's Eve, filled with young people celebrating their bright futures. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Williams. "Mrs. Smith," she answered on the second ring. "How are you feeling about everything we discussed?" "I want to explore my options," I said. "All of them." "Good. Can you come in tomorrow? I'd like to go over some specifics with you, and there are some documents you'll need to review." That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the beach house, sleeping in the master bedroom that I'd barely used in all the years I'd owned the place. It felt strange but also liberating, like I was finally claiming space that had always belonged to me, but never felt like mine. I cooked dinner in the kitchen, a simple pasta dish, and ate it on the deck while watching the sunset. When was the last time I'd done something just because I wanted to? When was the last time I'd made a decision based on my own desires, rather than Jessica's needs or financial constraints? The next morning, I drove straight to Patricia's office. She had coffee ready and a stack of papers that looked official and intimidating. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, settling into her chair across from me. "You have a unique opportunity here to reset the boundaries in this relationship. Your daughter has been treating your property as her own while simultaneously excluding you from it. That's not just disrespectful, it's legally problematic." She spread out several documents on the desk between us. Option 1 is a formal lease agreement. You charge her fair market rent for the property, which would be approximately $3,000 per month based on comparable beach house rentals in the area. This establishes a landlord-tenant relationship with clear rules and expectations. $3,000 a month. In a year that would be $36,000, more than I made in overtime pay working myself to exhaustion. She'd never agree to that, I said. Then she doesn't get to use the property. Option 2 is a limited use agreement. You specify exactly when and how she can use the house, with advance notice required, and your explicit approval for any gatherings. You maintain complete control while allowing some access. And option 3, Patricia smiled, the expression sharp and no. Option 3 is foreclosure proceedings. You claim financial hardship due to the ongoing costs of maintaining the property without rental income. You force a sale to recover your investment. But there's no mortgage. How can I foreclose on a house I own outright? You can't foreclose in the traditional sense, but you can initiate proceedings to recover costs and establish financial hardship. More importantly, you can use the threat of sale to motivate cooperation. Once your daughter realizes you're serious about protecting your investment, she might be more willing to negotiate. I thought about Jessica's voice on the phone, the casual assumption that I'd always be available to provide what she needed, while accepting whatever scraps of attention she offered in return. I thought about Marcus's lecture on financial responsibility while he stood in a backyard I'd paid for. What would foreclosure proceedings actually involve? Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. It would mean hiring an appraiser to determine the current market value, which I estimate at around 4. It would mean formally notifying any current occupants that the property is being prepared for sale due to financial necessity. It would mean establishing a timeline for vacation of the premises. Jessica isn't living there full-time, she just uses it on weekends. Doesn't matter if she's using it regularly without compensation. She has what we call presumptive occupancy rights. Those rights can be terminated with proper notice. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd spent so many years being accommodating, flexible, understand. What would it feel like to be demanding instead, to prioritize my needs over Jessica's wants? How long would the process take? If you're serious about selling, probably 60 to 90 days from initiation to close. If you're using it as leverage to negotiate better terms with your daughter, it could be resolved much faster. Sometimes the threat of action is more effective than the action itself. I spent the weekend thinking about it. I went back to work, picked up extra shifts, fell back into my routine of checking bank accounts and paying bills. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. On Monday, Jessica called during my lunch break at the hospital. "Hey Mom, Marcus booked dinner reservations for Valentine's Day weekend at that new restaurant right near the beach house. So we're definitely going to need the house that weekend. I can send you the dates if you want to put them on your calendar." The assumption in her voice, the way she'd moved from asking for permission to informing me of her plans, crystallized everything I'd been feeling. "Actually, Jessica, I need to talk to you about the beach house." "What about?" "I've been thinking about our conversation, about how you said I'd ruin the vibe at your New Year's party. It made me realize that maybe we need some clearer boundaries about how the house gets used." There was a pause. "Boundaries? Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that it's my house, and I've been letting you use it without any formal agreement about costs or expectations. That needs to change." "Costs? What costs?" "The mortgage is paid off, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utility. Last year alone, I spent $8,000 keeping that house operational, money that came out of my nursing salary while you and Marcus enjoyed free vacations." Jessica's voice got sharp. "We never asked you to buy that house. That was your choice. And we always clean up after ourselves and treat the place with respect." Respect would be including the owner in decisions about how it gets used. Respect would be contributing to the cost. Respect would be acknowledging that your free beach house comes at a significant expense to someone living on a fixed income. Fixed income? Mom, you still work full-time, you make decent money. The casual dismissal of my financial reality, the assumption that my salary was disposable income rather than the thin line between security and poverty, made me want to scream. I work full-time at 68 years old because I spent my retirement savings maintaining a house for my daughter who doesn't want me there when she entertains her friends. Silence. "Then, you're being dramatic. We had one party, and it would have been awkward for you. That doesn't mean you're not welcome at the house. When was the last time you invited me to spend a weekend there with you? When was the last time you asked if I wanted to use the house for my own plans?" Another pause. "You never said you wanted to use." "I never said I wanted to be excluded from it either. But that didn't stop you from disinviting me from New Year's Eve." Jessica sighed, the sound loaded with frustration. "Okay, fine, what do you want? Do you want us to pay rent or something?" The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted gratitude. I wanted to be treated like the owner of valuable property rather than the maintenance staff for someone else's lifestyle. I wanted my daughter to see me as more than a convenient source of free resource. I want to establish a formal agreement about how the house gets used and who pays for what. A formal agreement? With your own daughter? With the person who's been using my property without contributing to its upkeep? Mom, this is insane. We're family. We don't need contracts and formal agreements. Family is exactly why we need formal agreements, because informal arrangements clearly aren't working. The conversation ended badly, with Jessica hanging up in frustration and me sitting in the hospital break room feeling like I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. But for the first time in years it felt like the right line to cross. That afternoon I called Patricia Williams and scheduled another appointment. "I want to move forward with the foreclosure proceedings," I told her, "not necessarily because I want to sell the house, but because I want my daughter to understand that my generosity has limits." I'll draft the initial paperwork. Are you prepared for this to get uncomfortable?" I thought about Jessica's voice on the phone, the shocked indignation that I'd dare to assert ownership over my own property. I thought about all the years I'd worked overtime to pay for her comfort while accepting whatever level of attention and respect she chose to offer. "I'm 68 years old," I said. "I've been uncomfortable for years. It's time for someone else to be uncomfortable for a change." Patricia laughed, a sound of approval and understanding. "Mrs. Smith, I think you're going to be just fine." The paperwork took 3 days to prepare. During that time, Jessica didn't call or text, which told me she was either fuming or conferring with Marcus about how to handle their suddenly difficult mother. I went to work, came home,
and spent my evenings reading over the legal documents that would change everything. The formal notice of financial hardship and intent to sell was 12 pages long, full of legal language that boiled down to a simple message. Helen Smith could no longer afford to maintain the beach house without rental income, and therefore intended to sell the property to recover her investment and secure her financial future. It was scheduled to be delivered by certified mail on Friday afternoon, which meant Jessica would receive it on Saturday morning. I'd timed it deliberately to arrive during a weekend when she and Marcus might be planning to use the house, when the impact would be immediate and undeniable. Friday night, I barely slept, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. For decades I'd been the one receiving bad news, absorbing problems, adjusting my life to accommodate other people's decision. Tomorrow, for the first time in memory, I'd be the one delivering news that would require someone else to adjust. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mom, what the hell is this legal notice I just received?" Her voice was shrill, panicked in a way I'd rarely heard. The formal language of the foreclosure proceedings had apparently made an impression. "It's exactly what it says it is. Notice that I'm initiating proceedings to sell the beach house." "You can't be serious. You can't just sell the house out from under us." "I can sell my house whenever I choose to. That's what ownership means." "But Mom, we use that house. We have plans there." Marcus already made reservations for Valentine's Day weekend. Marcus can cancel his reservations, or he can pay fair market rate to rent the house for the weekend. Fair market rate? We're your family. Family doesn't exclude each other from New Year's Eve parties. Family doesn't lecture each other about financial responsibility while enjoying free beach vacations. Family doesn't assume ownership of property they didn't pay for. Jessica was quiet for a moment, and I could hear Marcus's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, you're upset about New Year's Eve. I get that, but selling the house is extreme. Can't we just talk about this like adults? We did talk about it. You told me I'd ruin your party. You told me I needed to let you have your special evening without worrying about whether I'd be comfortable. Well, now I'm having my special year without worrying about whether you're comfortable. Your special year. My year of putting Helen Smith first for a change. My year of making decisions based on what's best for my financial security rather than what's convenient for my daughter." More background conversation. Then Jessica came back on the line. "Okay, what do you want? What would it take for you to stop this sale?" The question I'd been waiting for. The acknowledgement that I had power in this relationship, that my decisions mattered, that my needs couldn't simply be dismissed or ignored. "I want a formal rental agreement. Fair market rate for any use of the property, security deposit, advance notice required for all visits, no parties or gatherings without explicit written permission." How much is fair market rate? $3,000 per month for full access, $500 per weekend for occasional use. $500 per weekend? Mom, that's insane. We can't afford that. Then you can't afford to use my beach house, just like I couldn't afford to exclude myself from my own property to make your party more comfortable. Jessica was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. "Is this really what you want? For us to have some kind of business relationship instead of a family relationship?" "I want us to have an honest relationship. One where my contributions are acknowledged and my ownership is respected. One where your enjoyment of my generosity doesn't come at the cost of my dignity." "I never meant to cost you your dignity. But you did. Every time you used my house without thinking about what it cost me to provide it. Every time you excluded me from celebrations that happened on property I own. Every time you lectured me about financial responsibility while enjoying the fruits of my financial sacrifice." The conversation went on for another 20 minutes, with Jessica alternating between anger and pleading. Marcus occasionally taking the phone to try a different approach, but the bottom line remained the same. I was done being the invisible benefactor of their lifestyle. I was done providing luxury they couldn't afford, while being treated like an inconvenience they had to manage. By the end of the call, we'd agreed to meet the following weekend to discuss terms, not at the beach house but at Patricia Williams' office,
with legal representation present. Jessica agreed to this reluctantly, only after I made it clear that the alternative was proceeding with the sale. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of being heard. Not agreed with, not pleased, but heard. My voice had carried weight. My decisions had consequences. My needs had been acknowledged as legitimate rather than dismissed as inconvenient. I called Patricia to update her on the conversation. "Sounds like your daughter is beginning to understand that you're serious," she said. "That's the first step toward a more equitable arrangement. Do you think she'll actually agree to pay rent?" "I think she'll agree to whatever it takes to keep using the house. The question is whether you're prepared to enforce the agreement once it's in place." I thought about that question for the rest of the weekend. Was I prepared to be the kind of mother who charged her daughter rent? Was I prepared to be the kind of property owner who evicted family members for non-payment? Was I prepared to prioritize my financial security over Jessica's comfort? The answer, I realized, was yes. I'd spent decades prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own security. It was time to balance the scales. Monday morning, I went back to work feeling lighter than I had in months. My colleagues noticed the change, commenting that I seemed more energetic, more confident. I didn't tell them about the beach house situation, but I carried myself differently, spoke up more in meetings, advocated more assertively for my patients. That's what ownership felt like. I realized, not just of property, but of decisions, of boundaries, of the right to say no without justification or apology. Jessica texted me twice that week, casual messages about work and weather, but underneath the normalcy I could sense her nervousness about our upcoming meeting. She was probably hoping I'd change my mind, that maternal guilt would override my newfound backbone, but I wasn't changing my mind. For the first time in my adult life, I was moving towards something I wanted rather than away from something I feared. And what I wanted was respect, acknowledgement, and fair compensation for the sacrifices I'd made. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I spent Friday evening preparing, reviewing the rental agreements Patricia had drafted, calculating the numbers that would make this arrangement profitable rather than charitable. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I was still Helen Smith, 68-year-old nurse, recent widow, mother of an ungrateful daughter, but I was also Helen Smith, property owner, legal adversary, woman who'd found her voice after decades of silence. Tomorrow, I'd find out which version of myself was stronger. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp January clarity that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a navy blue suit I'd worn to Robert's funeral 5 years ago. It felt appropriate somehow, marking the death of one version of myself and the emergence of another. I arrived at Patricia Williams' office 15 minutes early, wanting to settle in and review the documents one final time before Jessica and Marcus showed up. Patricia greeted me with coffee and a reassuring smile. "You look ready for this," she said, spreading the rental agreements across the conference table. "Remember, you hold all the cards here. This is your property, your decision, your term." I nodded, though my stomach was churning with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close to it. The fear of disappointing someone, of being seen as unreasonable, of crossing a line that would change my relationship with Jessica forever. But those fears felt smaller now than they had a week ago, overshadowed by something stronger: the determination to be treated with the respect I'd earned. Jessica and Marcus arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. Jessica usually ran late for everything, a habit that had always annoyed me but that I'd never challenged. Today, punctuality felt like an acknowledgement that this meeting mattered, that my time and my decisions carried weight. They looked expensive and polished. Marcus in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, Jessica in a designer dress with jewelry I'd never seen before. They looked like people who belonged in lawyers' offices, who were accustomed to negotiations and contracts and formal agreements. But as they settled into their chairs across from me, I could see the uncertainty in Jessica's eyes, the way she kept glancing at Marcus for reassurance. "Helen," Patricia began, her voice professionally warm, Why don't you start by explaining what you're hoping to accomplish today? I'd practiced this moment, but sitting across from my daughter made the words feel heavier than they had in rehearsal. I want to establish a fair and formal arrangement for the use of my beach house property, an arrangement that acknowledges my ownership, compensates me for the ongoing costs of maintenance, and respects my rights as the property owner. Jessica shifted in her chair. Mom, when you put it like that, it sounds so cold and businesslike. We're not strangers. We're family. Family members can have business arrangements, I replied. In fact, successful family relationships often require clear boundaries and mutual respect for each other's contribution. Marcus leaned forward, his investment banker confidence on full display. Mrs. Smith, we understand your concerns about the ongoing costs of the property, but before we discuss rental arrangements, maybe we should explore other options. Have you considered adding Jessica to the deed as co-owner? That would give her legal standing to contribute to decisions about the property, and share in both the costs and the benefits. The suggestion hit me like a slap. He was trying to maneuver Jessica into legal ownership of property she hadn't paid for, using the same smooth-talking approach he probably used with his banking clients. I offered to add Jessica to the deed in December, I said evenly. She declined because it might interfere with her loan applications for your new house purchase. Jessica flushed slightly. That was different. We were in the middle of mortgage pre-approval, and our banker said additional property holdings could complicate things. And now, Marcus answered before Jessica could speak. Our financial situation has stabilized since then. We closed on our Charleston house last week, so additional property holdings wouldn't be an issue anymore. I felt Patricia's eyes on me, a subtle warning not to be drawn into their attempts to reframe the conversation. This wasn't about Jessica's financial convenience or Marcus's strategic thinking. This was about my property and my term. The deed arrangement is no longer on the table, I said firmly. I'm offering rental terms for the use of my property. Take it or leave it. Jessica's composure cracked slightly. Mom, you can't be serious about charging us rent to use the beach house. It's always been our family play. It's always been my property that I allowed you to use without compensation. That arrangement is no longer sustainable for me financially, but you paid off the mortgage. There are no monthly payments anymore. Patricia intervened, sliding a document across the table. Miss Smith has provided a detailed breakdown of the annual costs associated with maintaining the property: property taxes, insurance, utilities, landscaping, routine maintenance, and repairs totaled $11,000. Marcus picked up the document, scanning the numbers with professional skepticism. Some of these costs seem inflated. $800 for landscaping. The yard isn't that big. The yard includes palm trees that require specialized care, irrigation systems that need seasonal maintenance, and hurricane preparation twice a year, I replied. Feel free to get quotes from local services if you think you can do it cheaper. Jessica was reading over Marcus's shoulder, her face growing paler as she processed the numbers. I had no idea it cost so much just to maintain the place. That's because you never asked. You assumed that because the mortgage was paid off, the house was free to maintain. But property ownership involves ongoing responsibilities that cost money every month. So what exactly are you proposing? Marcus asked, setting down the cost breakdown and focusing on the rental agreement. Patricia had prepared. Option 1 is full-time rental at $3,000 per month, which would give you unlimited access to the property with 30 days notice for any gatherings of more than 6 people. Option 2 is weekend rental at $600 per weekend, with advance reservations required and a maximum of 12 weekends per year. The silence that followed was thick with shock and calculation. I watched Marcus's face as he ran the numbers, seeing the exact moment he realized that either option would cost them significantly more than they'd ever budgeted for beach house access. $600 per weekend. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, that's more than some people pay for their entire mortgage. It's fair market rate for a 3-bedroom oceanside property with a pool and direct beach access. I had 3 different real estate agents provide comparable rental rates to ensure the pricing was accurate. Marcus was scribbling numbers on a legal pad, his jaw tight with concentration. At $600 per weekend for 12 weekends,
That's $7,200 per year. For that price, we could rent different beach houses all over the coast and never be tied to one location. Then that's what you should do, I said calmly. I'm not trying to compete with other rental properties. I'm trying to recover the costs of maintaining a property that I own but rarely get to enjoy myself. Jessica looked stricken. So this is really about money. After everything we've shared at that house, all the memories we've made there, you're reducing it to a financial transaction. The question struck deep, hitting the part of me that still wanted to be the giving, selfless mother who put her daughter's happiness above her own needs. But I'd learned something important over the past few weeks. Memories don't pay property taxes, and nostalgia doesn't cover insurance premiums. This is about respect, I said. Respect for my financial sacrifice, respect for my property rights, and respect for the fact that I deserve to benefit from my own generosity, instead of being excluded from it. We never excluded you from anything, Marcus said defensively. The New Year's Eve thing was just one night. One night that perfectly illustrated how you both see me in relation to that property. I'm useful for paying the bills and handling the maintenance, but inconvenient when you want to enjoy the benefits without acknowledging the cost. Patricia had been quietly observing the exchange, but now she leaned forward slightly. Perhaps we should discuss the practical aspects of either arrangement. Would you prefer to move forward with the full monthly rental or the weekend option? Jessica and Marcus exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that happens between couples who've learned to read each other's thoughts. I could see them calculating, weighing their desire for beach house access against the financial reality of actually paying for it. We need to discuss this privately, Marcus said finally. These numbers are significantly higher than we anticipated. Of course, Patricia replied. Why don't you take a few minutes to talk it over? Helen and I will step out and let you have some privacy. In the hallway outside the conference room, Patricia and I stood by the windows overlooking downtown Charleston. The Saturday afternoon traffic was light, and I could see couples walking hand in hand toward the waterfront restaurants, people who probably took weekend getaways for granted because they could afford to pay market rates for their entertainment. How do you think it's going? I asked. Better than I expected. Honestly, they're taking the numbers seriously, which means they're taking you seriously. That's half the battle right there. Jessica looks devastated. Jessica is realizing that her free ride is over. That's always devastating for people who've gotten used to other people's generosity without acknowledging the cost. I thought about that while we waited. How many times had I absorbed costs and inconveniences to make Jessica's life easier? How many times had I said yes when I wanted to say no, given when I needed to keep, accommodated when I deserved consideration? After 10 minutes, Patricia knocked on the conference room door, and we returned to find Jessica and Marcus looking grim but resigned. We can't afford the monthly option, Jessica said without preamble. $3,000 a month is more than our mortgage payment on the Charleston house. What about the weekend option? Patricia asked. Marcus consulted his notes. $600 per weekend is manageable for occasional use, but 12 weekends a year isn't enough. We typically use the house at least 20 weekends annually, plus holidays and vacation weeks. I felt a flicker of annoyance at his presumption. 20 weekends a year meant they were using my property nearly half the time, treating it like a second home they didn't have to pay for. No wonder the maintenance costs were so high. I could consider increasing the annual allowance to 15 weekends for an additional 15. That would bring the total to $8,700 per year for guaranteed access to 15 weekend periods. Jessica winced at the number. Almost $9,000 a year just to use the beach house. Mom, do you realize that's more than some people make in a month? Do you realize that I've been paying $11,000 a year to maintain a house I rarely get to use while you treat it like your personal vacation rent? The sharpness in my voice surprised even me, but I was tired of having my financial reality dismissed as irrelevant while their financial concerns were treated as paramount. Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Smith, we understand your position, but we need to be realistic about our budget. Could we start with a smaller arrangement and see how it works out? Maybe 6 weekends a year at the $600 rate. 6 weekends. I looked at him incredulously. You used the house more than 6 times between Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve alone. We're trying to find a compromise that works for everyone, Jessica said plaintively. 6 weekends would cover our major holidays and special occasions. And what about all the casual weekends when you decide you want to get out of the city? What about the times you invite friends down for impromptu gatherings? What about when Marcus wants to surprise you with romantic getaways? The specific mention of Marcus's Valentine's Day plans made Jessica flush again. She hadn't realized I knew about those reservations, and the reminder that their romantic planning had been built around the assumption of free access to my property clearly stung. Patricia sensed the tension rising and intervened smoothly. Why don't we structure this as a trial arrangement? 6 months with the 15-weekend option, with the understanding that terms can be renegotiated based on how well the arrangement works for everyone involved. It was a reasonable suggestion, but I found myself hesitate. 6 months felt like a long time to commit to an arrangement that might not address the underlying issues in my relationship with Jessica. What if she paid the money but continued to treat me like the hired help rather than the property owner? What if Marcus continued to make assumptions about future renovations and improvements without consulting me? I need additional provisions, I said. No parties or gatherings of more than 6 people without my explicit written permission, no overnight guests I haven't approved, no alterations or additions to the property without my consent, and all reservations must be made at least 2 weeks in advance. Marcus's expression darkened. Those restrictions seem excessive. You're essentially saying we can't use the house for entertaining friends or hosting family. I'm saying you can't use my house for entertaining friends or hosting family without my permission, just like you couldn't use anyone else's rental property without following their rules. But we're not anyone else, Jessica said desperately. We're your family members who told me I'd ruin your party if I attended, family members who lecture me about financial responsibility while enjoying the benefits of my financial sacrifice, family members who make renovation plans for property they don't own and vacation reservations they can't afford to pay for. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Jessica processing them, realizing perhaps for the first time how her behavior had been perceived, how her casual assumptions about my property had been experienced by the person actually paying for it. Mom, she said softly, I never meant to make you feel unwelcome in your own house. But you did, and you did it while simultaneously making yourselves completely at home there. Marcus set down his pen and looked directly at me. Mrs. Smith, what would it take for you to feel comfortable with a more flexible arrangement? What assurances would you need to trust us with greater access to the property? It was a good question, one that forced me to think beyond the financial aspects of our conflict. What would it take for me to feel respected rather than you? What would it take for me to trust that Jessica valued my generosity rather than simply expecting it? I'd need to see evidence that you understand the true cost of my generosity, I said slowly, not just the financial costs, but the personal cost. The overtime shifts I've worked to pay for your beach vacations, the retirement savings I've depleted to maintain a house you enjoy more than I do, the social sacrifices I've made to prioritize your access to luxury I can't really afford. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was smaller than before. I never asked you to make those sacrifices. No, you didn't ask. You just accepted them as your due while building your life around the assumption that they'd continue indefinitely. So what do you want from us? Marcus asked, frustration creeping into his professional composure. An apology, acknowledgement, gratitude. I want you to understand that generosity has limits, and mine have been reached. I want you to acknowledge that I've given far more than I've received in this relationship, and I want you to accept that going forward, my needs and my financial security take priority over your convenience and entertainment. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning, and the distant sound of traffic outside. I could see Jessica struggling with something, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Finally she spoke. What if we agreed to the 15-weekend arrangement, but also committed to helping with some of the maintenance costs? Like, what if we took over the landscaping contract and the pool maintenance? It was a reasonable offer, one that would reduce my annual expenses while giving them slightly more favorable terms, but something about the way Marcus was nodding approvingly made me hesitate. They were still trying to negotiate their way into a better deal rather than accepting that they'd been getting an extraordinarily good deal for years. The landscaping contract alone is $2,400 per year. If you're willing to take over both of those expenses, plus pay for 15 weekends at the standard rate, we'd be looking at a total annual cost to you of $12,900. Marcus did quick math on his legal pad and winced. That's actually more expensive than the monthly rental option. That's because you'd be paying for both usage and maintenance, just like I've been doing for the past 22 years. Jessica looked stricken. $12,900. Marcus, that's more than we spend on groceries in a year. It's also less than I've been spending to maintain a house you use more than I do, I pointed out. If that seems like too much money, imagine how it's felt for someone living on a nurse's salary. Patricia sensed that the negotiation was reaching a critical point. Perhaps we should take another break and let everyone process these numbers. This is a significant financial commitment, and it's important that you're comfortable with whatever arrangement you agree to. But I found myself not wanting a break. I wanted resolution. I wanted to know whether Jessica was willing to pay a fair price for what she'd been getting for free, or whether she'd rather give up access entirely than acknowledge the true cost of my generosity. I don't need another break, I said. I need a decision. Either you're willing to pay fair market value for the use of my property, or you're not. Either you're willing to acknowledge that my generosity has been costing me more than I can afford, or you're not. Either you're willing to treat me like the property owner I am, or you'd rather treat me like the accommodation service you think I should be. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I found myself unmoved by her emotion. I'd cried plenty of tears over the years, working overtime shifts and depleting my savings to maintain her access to luxury. Now it was her turn to be upset about financial reality.
Mom, please, can't we find some middle ground here? Some way to make this work for everyone? The middle ground is you paying $8,700 per year for 15 weekends of access to a $450,000 property. That's already a generous arrangement compared to market rates. Marcus was studying his notes again, running calculations that I suspected weren't adding up the way he'd hoped. What if we did 10 weekends instead of 15? That would bring the cost down to $6,000 annually. 10 weekends wouldn't cover your typical usage pattern. You'd end up wanting additional weekends and expecting me to accommodate special requests. Then what if we paid per weekend as we go? $600 per weekend, no annual commitment, but also no guaranteed availability. It was an interesting proposal, one that would give me more control over scheduling while still providing compensation for their usage, but it would also mean constantly negotiating individual reservations, dealing with last-minute requests, and managing their expectations about availability. That could work, I said slowly, but it would require significant advance notice for reservations, and I'd retain the right to decline requests that conflict with my own plans for the property. Jessica perked up slightly. Your own plans? Mom, when do you ever use the beach house? The question revealed so much about how she saw me, as someone whose personal desires were irrelevant compared to her social calendar. When did I ever use the beach house? I'd never been given the chance to develop my own relationship with the property, because I'd been too busy maintaining it for her use. Maybe I haven't used it much in the past because I've been too busy working to pay for your use of it. Maybe having rental income would give me the financial freedom to actually enjoy the property I own. Patricia was watching this exchange with professional interest, but I could see the approval in her eyes. I was learning to advocate for myself, to assert my own needs, rather than automatically deferring to Jessica's wants. So what would the per-weekend arrangement look like specifically? Marcus asked. $600 per weekend. Payable in advance. Reservations required at least 3 weeks ahead of time. No parties without written permission. No modifications to the property. And I retain the right to use the house myself, with 1 week's notice, even if it means canceling your reservation. The last provision was the most important to me. I wanted the legal right to prioritize my own use of my own property, something that had never occurred to me when I was focused solely on Jessica's happiness. Jessica and Marcus exchanged another long look, the kind of silent communication that probably involved mental calculations about their social calendar and entertainment budget. We need to think about this, Jessica said finally. It's a big change from how we've always done things. How we've always done things wasn't sustainable for me, I replied. That's why we're here. Patricia began gathering the documents. I'll prepare a formal agreement based on the per-weekend rental option we've discussed. You can review it at home and let us know your decision by the end of next week. As we stood to leave, Jessica approached me with the kind of tentative gesture she'd used as a child when she'd broken something and wasn't sure how much trouble she was in. Mom, I hope you know that I love you. I never meant for you to feel unappreciated. I looked at her, this woman I'd raised and sacrificed for, who'd grown into someone who could exclude me from parties at my own house while lecturing me about financial responsibility. I loved her too, but I was learning that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. I know you love me, Jessica, but love without respect and consideration isn't enough anymore. I need you to value my contributions, not just benefit from them. She nodded, though I wasn't sure she really understood what I meant. Understanding would come when she had to write the first $600 check for a weekend at the beach house, when she had to plan her social calendar around advance reservations and rental budget. As we left Patricia's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being taken seriously. My voice had carried weight in that room, my needs had been acknowledged as legitimate. My property rights had been respected as non-negotiable. The drive home gave me time to process what had happened. I'd drawn a line in the sand, established boundaries that would fundamentally change my relationship with Jessica. There was no going back to the old arrangement where I absorbed all the costs while she enjoyed all the benefits. But more than that, I'd discovered something about myself. I was capable of being assertive without being cruel, firm without being unreasonable. I could advocate for my own interests without sacrificing my love for my daughter. Sunday morning I drove down to the beach house alone. I wanted to see it through the eyes of someone who could actually afford to enjoy it. Someone who wasn't constantly worried about the next mortgage payment or maintenance bill. I spent the day reading on the deck, swimming in the pool, cooking myself a nice dinner in the kitchen I'd rarely used for my own pleasure. For the first time in years, I felt like the owner of the property rather than its caretaker. That evening, as I watched the sunset from the deck where Jessica had learned to walk, I realized something important. I didn't need her permission to enjoy my own property. I didn't need her gratitude to justify my decisions. I didn't need her approval to put my own needs first. I needed only what I'd always had: the legal right to make decisions about my own life and my own property. The difference was that now I was finally willing to exercise that right, even when it made other people uncomfortable, even when it made my daughter uncomfortable, especially when it made my daughter uncomfortable, because her comfort had been purchased with my sacrifice for far too long. Monday morning I went back to work feeling lighter than I had in months. When my colleagues asked about my weekend, I told them I'd spent it at my beach house. Not my daughter's beach house, not the family beach house, but my beach house. It felt good to say it. It felt like the truth. The week after the meeting passed in an unusual silence. No texts from Jessica about random things. No casual phone calls to complain about traffic or share funny video. The absence of her usual communication felt deliberate, like she was giving me time to reconsider my position, or perhaps hoping I'd reach out first to offer a more generous arrangement. I didn't reach out. Instead, I threw myself into work with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant undercurrent of financial anxiety about the beach house, I found myself more present with my patients, more engaged in the complex medical decisions that had always been my strength. Dr. Morrison, the chief of staff, even commented on my improved energy during our weekly rounds. "Helen, you seem different lately," he said as we reviewed patient charts Thursday morning. "More assertive in your recommendations, more confident in your assessments. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I smiled, knowing he couldn't possibly understand that my newfound confidence at work stemmed from finally learning to advocate for myself at home. When you stop accepting being treated as invisible in your personal life, it becomes easier to insist on being heard in your professional life too. Friday afternoon, Patricia Williams called just as I was finishing my shift. "I wanted to give you an update," she said. "I received a call from Jessica this morning. She and Marcus want to move forward with the per-weekend rental arrangement, but they're requesting some modifications to the term." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and wariness. Satisfaction that they'd accepted the reality of paying for what they'd been getting for free, wariness about what modifications they might be seeking. What kind of modification? They want to reserve the same weekends every year in advance, essentially creating a standing reservation system, Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and so forth. They're offering to pay for a full year upfront to secure these days. It was a clever proposal, one that would give them predictability while giving me immediate cash flow, but something about the request bothered me. It felt like another attempt to control access to my property, to create an arrangement that served their convenience, rather than acknowledging my ownership. How many weekends are they talking about? 12 per year, the major holidays, and what they're calling traditional family weekend. They'd pay $7,000 upfront each January for guaranteed access to these specific dates. I did quick mental math. 12 weekends would cover most of their typical usage pattern, while still leaving plenty of opportunities for me to use the house myself or rent it to others. The upfront payment would eliminate the need to chase monthly payments or deal with last-minute cancellations. What about my right to use the house during their reserved weekends if I need to? They're asking for that provision to be removed. They want guaranteed exclusive access to their reserved dates, arguing that they need certainty for vacation planning and social commitments. There it was, the attempt to turn my property into their private vacation home with a structured payment plan. They wanted the security of ownership without the responsibility, the predictability of exclusive access without the cost of actual purchase. No, I said firmly, I'm not giving up my right to prioritize my own use of my own property. The whole point of this arrangement is to establish that I'm the owner and they're the renters, not the other way around. I thought you might feel that way. There's something else. They're also requesting the right to make what they call minor improvements to the property, with your approval, of course. Things like upgrading the outdoor furniture, installing a sound system, maybe adding a hot tub. The audacity took my breath away. They wanted to modify my property to better suit their entertainment needs, using my beach house as their personal renovation project. It was exactly the kind of assumption that had created this problem in the first place. Absolutely not. No modifications, no improvements, no addition. They can rent the property as is, or find somewhere else to vacation. Patricia's voice carried a note of approval. I'll communicate your position to them. Should I also mention that you're prepared to proceed with the sale if they're not satisfied with the rental terms as originally discussed? Yes, make it clear that these are my final terms. Per weekend rental at $600, advance reservations required, no modifications to the property, and I retain the right to use the house myself with appropriate notice. Take it or leave it. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, processing the conversation. Jessica and Marcus were still trying to negotiate from a position of entitlement rather than accepting that they were now tenants rather than assumed heirs. They wanted the benefits of ownership without the burdens, the predictability of a permanent arrangement without the commitment of actually buying the property. But I was done accommodating their desire to have everything both ways. They could either accept being renters with limited rights, or they could give up access entirely. There would be no middle ground that allowed them to maintain control while I absorbed the risk. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I called my sister Margaret in Atlanta and told her the whole story. Margaret was 5 years older than me, a retired teacher who'd always been more practical about money and boundaries than I had been. Let me get this straight, she said after I'd explained the situation. You've been paying for a beach house for 22 years so your daughter could enjoy it, and when you asked her to start contributing to the costs, she tried to negotiate the terms like she was doing you a favor. That's exactly what happened. Margaret laughed, but not in a way that suggested amusement. Helen, I love you dearly, but you created this monster. You taught Jessica that your resources were unlimited and your needs were irrelevant. Of course she's shocked that you're suddenly asserting ownership of your own property. The words stung because they were true. I had created this dynamic by never setting boundaries, never requiring Jessica to acknowledge the cost of my generosity, never insisting that love be reciprocal rather than one-sided. So what should I do? Exactly what you're doing. Hold the line. Don't let her guilt you into backing down,
And don't let her boyfriend manipulate you with financial negotiations. You own the house, you set the rules. End of story. What if she chooses not to pay the rental fees? What if I lose my relationship with her over Margaret was quiet for a moment. Honey, what kind of relationship do you really have with someone who only values you for what you can provide? Someone who excludes you from celebrations at your own property? Someone who lectures you about responsibility while enjoying the fruits of your sacrifice? It was a hard question, one I'd been avoiding because I was afraid of the answer. What kind of relationship was built entirely on one person's willingness to give, while the other person simply maybe losing that kind of relationship would be a gain rather than a loss, Margaret continued. Maybe it would create space for a better relationship, built on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. After we said goodbye, I spent the weekend thinking about Margaret's words. I'd been so focused on preserving my relationship with Jessica that I'd never asked whether the relationship was worth preserving. In its current form, did I really want to continue being valued primarily as a resource, rather than a person? Monday morning brought another call from Patricia. I heard back from Jessica's side. They're rejecting your terms and making a counteroffer. I wasn't surprised, but I was curious about what new angle they'd try to pursue. They want to lease the property for the entire summer season, June through August. They argue that this gives you more money up front, while giving them the flexibility they need for vacation planning. It was actually a reasonable offer financially, more money than I'd make from individual weekend rentals during the peak season. But it would also mean giving up my own access to the house during the best months of the year, essentially turning me into a landlord for my own property during the time I'd most want to use it myself. What about my access during the summer? They're proposing that you could use the house in the spring and fall when the weather is less ideal for beach activities. I felt the familiar surge of anger, the same emotion that had driven me to initiate foreclosure proceedings in the first place. They were still trying to structure an arrangement that prioritized their needs over mine, still assuming that I'd be content with the leftovers of my own generosity. No, I'm not giving up summer access to my own beach house so they can have an exclusive rent. If they want summer-long access to beachfront property, they can buy their own house or rent from someone else. I thought that would be your response. Should I let them know that you're declining their counteroffer? Yeah, and remind them that the original per-weekend arrangement expires at the end of this week. If they haven't accepted those terms by Friday, I'm moving forward with listing the property for sale. It wasn't a bluff. I'd spent the weekend researching real estate markets and talking to agents about listing strategies. The beach house would sell quickly in the current market, probably for close to that money would eliminate my financial worries and give me the freedom to enjoy my retirement without constantly calculating whether I could afford groceries and property taxes in the same month. Tuesday brought an unexpected visit. Jessica showed up at my house during my lunch break, looking strained and tired in a way that made me wonder if she'd been sleeping poorly. Mom, we need to talk. I invited her in, noticing how she looked around my modest living room like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd never really considered where I lived when I wasn't maintaining her beach house for her convenience. The lawyers and the formal negotiations are making this too complicated, she said, settling onto my couch. We're family, we should be able to work this out between ourselves. I sat across from her in the chair I'd bought at a thrift store 5 years ago, back when every penny was going toward beach house payments. We tried to work it out between ourselves. You told me I'd ruin your New Year's Eve party. I said that wrong. I was trying to spare your feelings, to let you know that the party would be loud and chaotic and probably not fun for you. I didn't mean to exclude you, but you did exclude me. And then you lectured me about financial responsibility while standing in a backyard I've been paying for with overtime wages and retirement savings. Jessica looked down at her hands, expensive manicure catching the afternoon light streaming through my window. I didn't realize how much it was costing you. I thought because the mortgage was paid off, it was basically free to maintain. Nothing is free to maintain, Jessica. Not houses, not relationships, not the lifestyle you've been enjoying at my expense. At your Mom, you chose to buy that house, you chose to keep it after Dad died. Nobody forced you to make those payments. There it was again, the refusal to acknowledge that my choices had been made for her benefit, that my sacrifices had created her opportunity. She could acknowledge the financial cost of the house, but not the personal cost to me. You're right, I chose to keep paying for a house my daughter loved, but I also have the right to choose what happens to that house going forward. And I choose not to keep subsidizing your lifestyle while being treated like hired help. Jessica's composure cracked slightly. Hired help? Mom, that's not how I see you. Then how do you see me? Because from where I sit, it looks like you see me as someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to pay for your entertainment while staying out of the way when you actually want to enjoy it. That's not fair. What's not fair is working double shifts at 68 years old to maintain a property for someone who doesn't want you there when she entertains her friends. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken resentment filling the space between us. I could see Jessica processing what I'd said, trying to reconcile her view of herself as a loving daughter with my experience of being used and dismissed. What do you want from me, Mom? What would make this right? It was the first time she'd asked what I wanted rather than trying to tell me what I should accept. The question deserved an honest answer. I want you to acknowledge that I've given far more than I've received in this relationship. I want you to accept that my generosity has limits and those limits have been reached. And I want you to treat me like the property owner I am, rather than the accommodation service you think I should be. So you want me to pay rent to use the beach house. I want you to pay fair market value for a luxury you can't afford to provide for yourself, just like you'd pay anyone else who owned property you wanted to use. Jessica was quiet for a long time, staring at the coffee table where I'd spread out bills so many nights, calculating whether I could afford both the beach house expenses and my own living costs. $600 per weekend is a lot of money for $11,000 per year was a lot of money for me, but I paid it so you could have access to something beautiful. But you're my mother. Isn't that what mothers do? The question hit deep, striking at the core of how I'd defined myself for decades. Yes, mothers sacrifice for their children, but they don't sacrifice themselves entirely, and they don't continue sacrificing when their children become adults who could contribute but choose not to. Mothers love their children, but love doesn't mean unlimited financial support without acknowledgement or appreciation. Love doesn't mean accepting disrespect in exchange for providing luxury. Jessica started crying then, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use with Marcus when she wanted something, but the genuine tears of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth about themselves. I never meant to be ungrateful. I never meant to take advantage of you. But you did take advantage of me, and when I asked you to start contributing, your first instinct was to negotiate for better terms rather than acknowledge what I'd already given. So what happens now? Do we just become landlord and tenant? Do we stop being mother and daughter? We become mother and daughter who have honest conversations about money and boundaries. We become mother and daughter who acknowledge each other's contributions rather than taking them for granted. Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box I kept on the side table, the same box I'd reached for so many nights when the stress of maintaining two households had become overwhelming. The weekend rental arrangement, the $600, the advance reservation. If I agree to all of that, can we go back to being normal? We can't go back to the old normal because the old normal was unsustainable for me, but we can create a new normal based on mutual respect and fair exchange. And if I can't afford to pay rent for the beach house, if Marcus and I decide it's too expensive for our budget, then you find other places to vacation, like most people do. The world is full of beautiful places that don't require your mother to subsidize your enjoyment of them. The conversation continued for another hour, with Jessica gradually accepting that the old arrangement was over regardless of whether she chose to participate in a new one. By the time she left, she'd agreed to discuss the rental terms with Marcus and give me a final answer by the end of the week. That night, I called Patricia to update her on the conversation. "How do you feel about how it went?" she asked. Sad but relieved. Sad that it took a legal confrontation for my daughter to really hear me, but relieved that she finally understands I'm serious about this, and if she decides not to pay the rental fees, then I'll sell the house and use the money to secure my own retirement. I'm done prioritizing her financial comfort over my financial security. Wednesday and Thursday passed without any communication from Jessica. I found myself checking my phone more often than usual, wondering what decisions she and Marcus were making, whether they were looking for other vacation options, or calculating whether they could afford to keep using my property on my terms. Friday morning, Patricia called with their answer. They've agreed to the per-weekend rental arrangement, she said, $600 per weekend advance reservations, no modifications to the property. They want to start with a 6-month trial period, and then evaluate whether to continue. I felt a complex mix of emotion, relief that they'd accepted my terms, satisfaction that my boundaries had been respected, but also a lingering sadness that our relationship had required legal intervention to reach a place of mutual respect. Did they seem happy about the arrangement? They seemed resigned to it. Jessica mentioned that they'd looked into other vacation rental options and realized your rates are actually competitive with similar properties. Of course they were competitive. I'd researched the market carefully to ensure I wasn't being unreasonable.
What had been unreasonable was their expectation that they could continue enjoying luxury accommodations without paying market rates for them. When do they want to start? They've already submitted a reservation request for the weekend after next. Marcus apparently has a work event in Charleston and they want to extend it into a beach weekend. I found myself smiling. My first paying customers for a property I'd owned for 22 years. It felt like a milestone, a symbol of my transition from doormat to business owner. Tell them the reservation is approved. And Patricia, thank you for helping me find my voice in this situation. You found your own voice, Helen. I just provided the legal framework for you to use it. That afternoon, I drove down to the beach house to prepare for Jessica and Marcus's first rental weekend. I cleaned thoroughly, stocked the kitchen with basic supplies, and left a folder of house rules and local recommendations on the counter. It felt strange to be preparing for Jessica's visit as if she were any other renter, but it also felt appropriate. As I walked through the house one final time, checking that everything was ready, I realized something important had changed. This place finally felt like mine in a way it never had before. Not because I'd excluded Jessica from it, but because I'd established my ownership of it clearly and unapologetic. The sunset that evening was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the ocean like scattered jewels. I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, something I'd rarely allowed myself during the years when every penny had gone toward mortgage payments and maintenance costs. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Thank you for letting us rent the house this weekend. We're looking forward to letting them rent the house, as if my ownership had ever been in question, as if I'd been graciously allowing them to pay me instead of simply insisting on fair compensation for luxury accommodation. But the gratitude in her message was genuine, and that mattered more than the slightly off phrasing. For the first time in years, Jessica was acknowledging that access to the beach house was a privilege I granted rather than a service I owed. I texted back a simple response. You're welcome. Enjoy your stay. Saturday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as Jessica and Marcus arrived for their first official rental weekend. They looked different somehow, more careful as they unloaded their car, more respectful as they approached the house they were now paying to use. Jessica waved when she saw me in the window, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. We were still mother and daughter, but we were also landlord and tenant now. The dual relationship would take some getting used to, but it felt more honest than what we'd had before. Sunday evening, after they'd checked out and left the house clean and undamaged, Jessica called to thank me for the weekend. The house was perfect, Mom. Clean, well-stocked, everything we needed for a relaxing getaway. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Mom, I wanted to say something else. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about how much you sacrificed to keep that house. I never really understood the full cost until we started looking at other vacation rental options. What you provided for us for free for all those years, it was extraordinary. The acknowledgement I'd been waiting for, the recognition that my generosity had been genuine and costly, It didn't erase the years of feeling taken for granted, but it was a start toward a more balanced relationship. Thank you for saying that, Jessica. It means a lot to finally feel appreciated. I know I can't undo the ways I took advantage of your generosity, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see how much you gave, and how little I acknowledged it. We talked for a few more minutes about their weekend, about their plans for future rentals, about the strange adjustment period we were both navigating. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being both generous and respected, loving, and valued. Monday morning, I deposited Jessica's first rental payment into my bank account, $600 for a weekend of access to property worth nearly $500,000. It was still a generous arrangement, but it was no longer a one-sided gift. More importantly, it was an arrangement based on mutual respect rather than assumed entitlement. Jessica valued the beach house enough to pay for it, and I valued myself enough to charge for it. That evening, I started planning my own weekend at the beach house, the first vacation I'd taken in years that wasn't built around someone else's schedule or needs. I would read books I wanted to read, cook food I wanted to eat, and watch sunsets without calculating the cost of my enjoyment. For the first time since Robert died, I felt financially secure enough to enjoy the fruits of my own labor. The rental income wouldn't make me wealthy, but it would cover the ongoing costs of the property while providing a small cushion for my retirement. More than that, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I was capable of being firm without being cruel, assertive without being unreasonable. I could advocate for my own needs, without sacrificing my love for my daughter. The woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion paying for other people's luxury was gone. In her place was someone who understood that generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction, and that love without respect is just exploitation dressed up in family obligation. I was Helen Smith, property owner, businesswoman, mother who'd finally learned the difference between supporting her daughter and enabling her daughter's entitlement, and for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. 6 months into our new arrangement, I barely recognized my own life. The constant anxiety about money had lifted like fog clearing from the coastline, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten existed: genuine peace of mind. The rental income from Jessica's weekend stays covered the beach house expenses with money left over, money that went into a savings account I'd labeled Helen's Future on my banking app. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first few rental weekends felt awkward, like we were all playing roles we weren't quite comfortable with yet. Jessica would arrive with the careful politeness of a respectful tenant, while I found myself torn between wanting to be the accommodating mother and needing to be the professional property owner. But gradually we'd settled into a rhythm that worked for both of us. What surprised me most was how much I enjoyed having boundaries. When Jessica texted to request an extra day beyond her reserved weekend, I could simply say no without guilt or lengthy explanation. When Marcus asked about installing a wine refrigerator in the kitchen, I could decline without feeling obligated to justify my decision. My property, my rules, my choice, the simplicity of it was liberating. More rental inquiries had started coming in from other sources. Word had gotten around Jessica's social circle that the beach house was available for rental, and several of her friends had reached out asking about availability. I'd been selective, choosing renters who seemed responsible and respectful, gradually building a small but steady stream of income that made the property profitable rather than just manageable. The financial security had unexpected ripple effects throughout my life. At the hospital, I'd stopped automatically volunteering for every overtime shift, choosing instead to work a schedule that left time for rest and personal interests. I'd joined a book club, started taking cooking classes, even booked a long weekend trip to Savannah just because I wanted to see the historic district. Small luxuries that had been impossible when every spare dollar went toward beach house expenses. Dr. Morrison had noticed the change during our quarterly performance review. "Helen, I don't know what's different about you lately, but whatever it is, keep doing it. You're more present with patients, more confident in your clinical decisions, more willing to speak up in staff meetings. It's like you found your voice." He wasn't wrong, Learning to assert myself with Jessica had taught me to assert myself everywhere else too. When pharmacy tried to push through a medication order I knew was inappropriate, I pushed back firmly instead of second-guessing myself. When administration proposed schedule changes that would have been detrimental to patient care, I spoke up in meetings instead of staying silent. The woman who'd learned to advocate for her own property rights had discovered she could advocate for her professional judgment too. The biggest test of our new arrangement came in July when Jessica requested access to the beach house for her birthday weekend. It was the same weekend I'd already promised to my book club for our annual retreat, a commitment I'd made specifically because I knew it would conflict with one of Jessica's traditional beach house weekends. Her text message carried the familiar tone of assumption I'd hoped we'd moved past. "Mom, I know it's short notice, but Marcus wants to surprise me with a birthday party at the beach house next weekend. Can you make sure it's available? We're thinking maybe 20 or 30 people. Nothing too crazy." The old Helen would have canceled her book club plans without hesitation, prioritizing Jessica's celebration over her own commitment. The new Helen read the message twice, recognized the subtle return to entitlement, and crafted a response that was polite but firm. "The house is already booked for that weekend, and I don't allow parties without advance approval anyway. You'll need to find another venue for your celebration." Her response came within minutes. "Booked by who? Can't you just cancel whoever it is? This is my birthday, Mom." The assumption that I would cancel other paying customers to accommodate her last-minute request revealed how little she'd internalized the changes in our relationship. She still saw herself as the priority booking, the customer whose needs superseded everyone else's, including mine. "The house is booked by me for my book club retreat. I'm not canceling my plans for your party." The silence that followed lasted 3 days. No texts, no calls, no casual communications. I could picture Jessica fuming to Marcus about my unreasonableness, probably expecting me to cave and reach out with an apology and a compromise. But I'd learned something important about boundary setting. The people who get angry when you establish limits are usually the people who were benefiting most from your lack of limits. When Jessica finally called, her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, genuine respect for my autonomy. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I was thinking about the beach house like it was still our family place where I could just make plans and expect you to accommodate them. But it's your business now, and I was being inconsiderate of your other commitment." The acknowledgement felt like a victory, but not the kind that required gloating or extensive commentary. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you found another venue for your party." "We did, actually. Marcus booked a restaurant with a private room. It'll probably be better anyway. No cleanup required." She paused. "And Mom, I hope you have a wonderful time with your book club. You deserve to enjoy your own plans." After we hung up, I sat in my living room, feeling something that took me a moment to identify. Pride. Not just in my decision to hold firm on my boundaries, but in Jessica's growth. She was learning to see me as a person with my own life and priorities, rather than a resource that existed to facilitate her desires. The book club weekend was everything I'd hoped it would be. 6 women in their 60s and 70s, all of us finally at a stage of life where we could prioritize our own interests without guilt. We spent the days reading by the pool, discussing literature over wine, cooking meals together in the kitchen I'd rarely used for my own pleasure. It felt like a preview of the retirement I might actually be able to afford now. Margaret visited the weekend after book club, driving down from Atlanta to see the beach house she'd helped me defend. I'd told her about the rental arrangement, but seeing it in action impressed her more than my descriptions had. "You've really turned this place into a business," she said as we sat on the deck with our morning coffee. "Professional guest information, house rules posted in every room, a reservation system. You're not just renting to Jessica anymore, you're running a legitimate vacation rental." She was right. What had started as a way to make Jessica pay for her beach house usage had evolved into something larger, a source of income that gave me financial independence and personal satisfaction. I'd discovered I was good at hospitality, good at creating comfortable spaces for people to enjoy, good at managing property and customer relationships. "Have you thought about expanding?" Margaret asked,
maybe buying another rental property or converting this into a full-time business. The idea had crossed my mind, actually. The income from beach house rentals was substantial enough that I could potentially reduce my hospital hours, or even retire early if I had multiple properties generating revenue. But for now I was content with the progress I'd made. "I'm taking it one step at a time," I said. "For now I'm just enjoying the fact that I can afford to maintain this place without sacrificing my own financial security." "And how are things with Jessica these days?" It was a complicated question. Our relationship had definitely improved since the rental arrangement began, but it was different now, more honest, but also more formal. We talked regularly, but the conversations had boundaries that hadn't existed before. She asked about my life and plans, instead of just updating me on her. I felt respected, but I also felt more distant. "Better," I said finally. "More equal. She treats me like an adult with my own life instead of a service provider for hers." "Do you miss the old dynamic at all?" Margaret's question surprised me. Did I miss being taken for granted? Did I miss the financial stress of subsidizing Jessica's lifestyle? Did I miss feeling invisible and undervalued? "I miss feeling needed," I said slowly, "but I don't miss feeling used." The new arrangement is healthier even if it's less emotionally intense. Labor Day weekend brought another milestone, Jessica's first full-price holiday rental. Previous holiday weekends had always been automatically reserved for her use, but this year she'd booked and paid the premium rate I charged for high-demand days. $900 for 3 days, the same rate I charged non-family renters. She'd agreed to the price without complaint, which told me she was finally understanding the true market value of what I'd been providing for free all those years. More importantly, she'd treated the reservation like any other business transaction, submitting the request through my official booking system instead of assuming family privilege. The weekend went smoothly, with Jessica and Marcus leaving the house spotless and even writing a positive review for my rental listing. "Beautiful property, excellent amenities, very professional management," Jessica had written, as if she were reviewing a stranger's vacation rental instead of her mother's beach house. September brought an unexpected opportunity. Dr. Morrison approached me about early retirement options, explaining that the hospital was offering enhanced packages to senior nurses as part of a restructuring plan. "You'd be eligible for full benefits at 68, he explained during our meeting. "The package includes healthcare continuation and a modest pension supplement. With your years of service, it's actually quite generous. 6 months earlier, early retirement would have been impossible. The beach house expenses alone would have consumed any pension income, leaving me unable to afford basic living expenses. But with rental income covering property costs and providing surplus cash flow, early retirement was not just possible but potentially comfortable." I asked for time to consider the offer, but I already knew what my decision would be. 30 years of nursing had been fulfilling, but I was tired. Tired of night shifts, tired of the physical demands of hospital work, tired of organizing my life around other people's medical emergencies. The idea of having time for travel, hobbies and personal interests felt like a gift I'd finally earned. That evening, I called Patricia Williams to discuss the financial implications of early retirement. We'd become friends of sorts over the months since our initial meeting, bonding over our shared experience of helping women find their voices in difficult family situations. "The rental income alone won't make you wealthy," she said after reviewing my numbers, "but combined with your pension and Social Security, you'll be comfortable, more comfortable than most people your age, actually, and I'll have time to potentially expand the rental business if I want additional income." "Exactly. You've created multiple income streams instead of depending entirely on employment. That's sophisticated financial planning." 6 months ago, I'd been living paycheck to paycheck, working overtime shifts to cover someone else's vacation expenses. Now I was being complimented on my financial sophistication by an attorney who specialized in complex property matters. I submitted my retirement paperwork the next week, with an official departure date of December 31st. 3 months to transition my patients, train my replacement, and prepare for a new chapter of life built around my own priorities instead of everyone else's needs. The news created unexpected reactions from different people in my life. My nursing colleagues were envious, wishing they had the financial security to consider early retirement. Jessica was surprised, not having realized that the rental income had changed my financial situation so dramatically. Margaret was proud, calling it the logical conclusion of my journey toward independence. Marcus's reaction was the most interesting. During one of their rental weekends in October, he approached me privately, while Jessica was reading on the beach. "Mrs. Smith, I owe you an apology. When this whole rental arrangement started, I thought you were being unreasonably rigid about money, but watching you build a business from scratch, seeing how the financial security has changed your life, I realize you were just protecting your interests the way anyone would." It was the first time he'd acknowledged me as a competent business person, rather than just Jessica's difficult mother. "I appreciate you saying that, Marcus. Jessica and I have actually been talking about maybe buying our own beach property in a few years. Your success with this place has shown us what's possible with the right investment and management." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, covering property values, rental markets, and investment strategy. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus was talking to me as an equal, someone whose financial acumen he respected rather than someone whose resources he could exploit. November brought my final holiday season as a working nurse. Thanksgiving week was traditionally one of my busiest times at the hospital, but this year it felt different knowing it was my last. I found myself savoring the interactions with patients, appreciating the camaraderie with colleagues, acknowledging the satisfaction I'd found in medical care even as I prepared to move on to something new. Jessica invited me to spend Thanksgiving with her and Marcus in Charleston, a tradition we'd maintained even through the most strained periods of our relationship. But this year felt different too. Instead of being the accommodating mother who fit into their plans, I was the successful business owner who graciously accepted their invitation. The conversation over dinner reflected our changed dynamic. Jessica asked about my retirement plans, my travel ideas, my thoughts about potentially expanding the rental business. Marcus shared investment advice and asked my opinion about real estate market. I felt heard, respected, valued for my judgment, rather than just my willingness to provide resources. "Mom, I'm really proud of what you've built," Jessica said as we cleared the dinner dishes. 6 months ago, if someone had told me you'd become a successful business owner, I probably would have been skeptical, but you've proven that you're incredibly capable when you put your own interests first. The comment struck me as both compliment and confession. Jessica was acknowledging that she'd underestimated my capabilities, probably because she'd only seen me in the context of accommodating her needs, rather than pursuing my own goals. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's been quite a learning experience. Do you ever regret not doing something like this sooner, not setting boundaries with me earlier?" It was a mature question, one that suggested real reflection on her part about our relationship history. I considered my answer carefully. "I regret not valuing myself sooner," I said finally. "I regret not recognizing that generosity without boundaries becomes self-destruction. But I don't regret the love I showed you or the support I provided. I just regret not requiring that love and support to be mutual." December flew by in a flurry of retirement preparations and year-end booking. The beach house was booked solid through New Year's weekend, generating more income in 1 month than I'd ever imagined possible from the property. I'd learned to price dynamically, charging premium rates for high-demand periods and offering discounts during slower times to maintain steady occupancy. My last day at the hospital was December 30th, a fitting end to both my nursing career and the most transformative year of my adult life. My colleagues threw a small retirement party, presenting me with a photo album documenting my 3 decades of service, and a gift certificate for a weekend spa retreat. Dr. Morrison's speech at the party captured something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. "Helen represents the best of what nursing can be: competent, caring, and willing to advocate for what's right even when it's difficult. We'll miss her clinical expertise, but more than that, we'll miss her example of how to stand up for yourself and your patients with dignity and strength." January 1st arrived with unprecedented clarity about my future. I woke up in my own house with no alarm clock, no schedule to meet, no one else's needs to prioritize before my own. For the first time in decades, My day belonged entirely to me. I spent the morning reviewing my financial situation, something that had become a pleasure rather than a source of anxiety. The rental income projections for the coming year looked strong, with bookings already extending into the summer months. My retirement accounts were modest but adequate, especially when combined with the property income. More importantly, I had options. I could travel, pursue hobbies, maybe even buy additional rental properties if I decided to expand the business. I could volunteer for causes I cared about, take classes that interested me, spend time with friends without constantly calculating the cost of social activities. The afternoon brought a text from Jessica. Happy New Year, Mom. Marcus and I are so grateful for everything you've taught us about financial responsibility and business management. Looking forward to our next rental weekend. The message made me smile. Our relationship had found its equilibrium, built on mutual respect and clear boundaries instead of unlimited giving and unconscious taking. We were still mother and daughter, but we were also landlord and tenant, business owner and customer, two adults who'd learned to value each other's contributions. That evening, I drove down to the beach house for my own New Year's celebration. Not a rental weekend or a family obligation, but a personal retreat, to mark the transition from one life to another. I'd invited Margaret to join me, and we spent the evening cooking dinner together, drinking wine, and watching the sunset from the deck where so much of my transformation had begun. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stood up to Jessica about the New Year's party? Margaret asked as we sat with our coffee, watching the ocean reflect the stars. I'd probably still be working overtime shifts to pay for her entertainment while feeling guilty about asking for basic respect in return, and she'd probably still be taking your generosity for granted without understanding the cost. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the waves and processing how much had changed in 1 year. I thought about the woman I'd been 12 months ago, stressed about money, working herself to exhaustion, accepting being excluded from parties at her own property. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd outgrown, like clothes that no longer fit. What's next for Helen Smith, successful business owner? Margaret asked. I considered the question seriously. What was next? More travel, certainly. Maybe additional property, possibly some volunteer work that utilized my medical background, definitely more time for relationships and activities that brought me joy rather than just obligation. Whatever I want, I said finally, for the first time in my adult life, what's next is entirely up to me. The simplicity of that truth was still astonishing. No one else's needs to consider first, no one else's financial security to prioritize over my own. No one else's approval to seek before making decisions about my life and property. I was Helen Smith, 68 years old, retired nurse, successful property owner, woman who'd learned the difference between love and enabling, between generosity and self-sacrifice. I was someone who'd found her voice, established her boundaries, and built a life based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. And for the first time in decades, that felt like everything I'd ever wanted to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.